All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Claire Longo. I'm the host here at the podcast Conversations with My Friends in AI. I brought in some amazing friends. We've got Chase and Amber here. Let's do a quick round of intros. Maybe Chase, you kick us off.
Yeah, for sure. Really excited. So thanks for having me. First off, I'm honored to be part of the alumni now of Friends in AI. So
Dude, when I met you, I was like, he's gonna be on my podcast. I just have to find the right topic. This is it.
Which is exciting. My name's Chase Christensen. I'm a solutions architect. So I get to talk to people, have a lot of conversations about machine learning, AI. Really what I'd like to do is help people save time. And it actually started because I went to school to make video games, which is interesting that I'm here now. And I worked on the Call of Duty World War II video game where there was a lot of manual testing.
Yeah.
And it drove me insane. And so then from there, I was like, no more manual testing ever. Like, I hate it. I hate doing the same thing over and over. And I was like, the amount of human suffering from quality assurance is like, I'm like, it's my crusade. I'm going to start a religion here. And so I actually started looking at things like DevOps. I got into a gig at Insight, which is like a vendor added reseller, basically working in like a real infrastructure labs, like Pure Storage, HPE, Cisco. And I got to like play with networking. I got to play with all these things. And eventually I was like, well, this Kubernetes thing is out and about. I should learn that. And I got really into Kubernetes. And then from there, I actually joined Aricto that was doing Kubeflow, which was like, wow, like a reason to run Kubernetes versus I used to have these conversations with people that was like, yeah, we want to do Kubernetes. I'm like, oh, what's that going to do for you? And they kind of stare at you blinking. So that was really fun. And then now I get to do that is talk to customers about open source and Kubernetes and Kubeflow and all these different technologies and how they can help them, as well as what it actually means to be open source, whether you're like a vendor or like a user of open source or a contributor, like how that all works and how it should work. And actually, Amber is kind of the person that literally has taught me like pretty much everything I know on how open source should work. So I think, Amber, this is kind of your handoff here.
That is amazing. Yeah, Amber. Oh, are we getting her audio?
You're muted.
I was muted because my dogs were barking. Sorry.
There she is.
I don't know about all that, Chase, but I think I'm just old and been around this since the early 90s when I first got introduced to open source, because back then my husband had met this guy by the name of Dan James who worked for Mistech, I believe. Anyway, he gave him a stack of those disks, and it was for Slackware, and then had this great idea that we're going to test an uplink to an aircraft in flight, because back then when 18th Airborne Corps went anywhere in the world, they didn't get intel till they were boots on the ground. So I got to see them test Slackware with these old Zenith notebooks, which is the reason I wear glasses today, because it was the blue letter with the gray screen, or the gray screen with the blue letters, however you want to think about it. Anyway, testing an uplink in an aircraft, and proved that you could use open source to do that. But then I got married and was a stay-home mom for a long time, and every time I would try to use open source and my husband wasn't there, something would go wrong and I couldn't print, or heaven forbid do a newsletter or something for the school, and I would go back to my Mac. And so fast forward, he's working at Canonical, and he brings me home this live CD and gives me this old Dell laptop and says, you know what, you're on your own, use the community. Not everybody has a kernel developer sitting in their living room. I'm not going to help you. Here's your tools, go figure it out. So
wow,
figured out how to install Ubuntu and got it working. It took a couple hours to get everything, but I was up and blogging again in like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 hours. And so then I started talking about journey into Ubuntu or something like that, and it was like part 1, part 2, and I was tweeting them back in the day, and somebody says, I'll never forget, this is how my first introduction to Joe Brockmeyer, he's known as affectionately in open source as Zonker. He says, can you name your blog post something that tells me what it's supposed to be about? I didn't know anything about really writing back then. And okay, sure, let me start changing up my titles, let me figure out how to do this. And then I was getting involved in a little bit in the Fedora community, and then really in the Ubuntu community. And then from there, kept writing. One of the editors for Linux New Media, Ricky Inslee, found my blog and said, somebody get this woman a book deal. All because I explained bugs like in software as I related it to, a bug is like a moth. It's kind of irritating, but you can deal with it.
Uh-huh.
Spiders, I feel like critical bugs, and they have to be eradicated right then, just like spiders have to be eradicated right then.
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate to that. Like, I feel like we need a new way to prioritize bugs at my company now. I'm going to use that. It's not a
Well,
bug, it's a spider. That's a different emoji.
right, exactly. And so, and then from there, I got picked up by Pearson to be a technical reviewer for, I think, edition 5 of the official Ubuntu book. And then when edition 6 came around, I was one of the official co-authors, and then did edition 7 as well. So got to be a co-author for the official Ubuntu book back then, and then helped Linux New Media launch Ubuntu User Magazine. I think it was in print till 2017 or something like that. And I had a blog on there called You and Ubuntu, and where I just wrote about whatever I would learn about Ubuntu, I'd write about it. And then after that, I went over to Lenaro, which is Linux on ARM, so all the embedded space, their first community manager. And then from there, this thing called Open Compute Project Foundation stood up. And so they brought me in as their second employee to architect and help develop that community. So that was pretty fun. So I got to work on data center hardware and that whole space and projects around that. And then from there, I took a break from technology, and I managed a bar in New Orleans. So I managed a bar and booked bands and bartended, and I
life. That's so fun.
it was great fun. So
Yeah.
But I would tell these bands, like, you need, let's build a community around your music and your genre. I'm not going to do it for you, but here's the tools to do it. And so I would kind of share those techniques and stuff there. So if you're ever down in New Orleans, go by DMAX, or if you're ever in Orange Beach, go by DMAX and see them. And then I got a call one day from my friend John O'Bacon, who said, "Are you ever coming back to open source?" And I'm like, I might. No, I might. And one of the clients he was consulting with was looking, actually 2 clients he was consulting with were looking for community managers. And I said, maybe for the right, maybe for the right technology, I'll come back.
Yeah.
And from there, I went over to Corelight to work on the Zeek community. So that's network security monitoring, things like that. So I got to try that space out. And then from there, I had the opportunity to come to Aricto. And from Aricto now at HP as their open source evangelist and community manager for the Esmeralda software side of things. So really learning not only about Esmeralda and what's happening on that front, but our AI software solutions and the other open source pieces that HP has. I was surprised to learn there were more than, most people don't put HP and open source together, but there are a lot of things that are happening in, near, and around the open source ecosystem. So, and then, I'm naturally curious. So I'm all the time looking for people like you, like with your Friends of AI cast to write about. I tell people it's personalities, it's people, it's places, in and around open source. Everybody has a story of how you got to where you are, and being able to tell that story and share that story is pretty incredible. And I just want to make sure that people, no matter whether they're a developer or not, understand that there is a place for them in open source. You only have to ask about 5 questions to find out where they would really fit in to an open source project based on their skills and that sort of thing. So I have these stickers. I don't know if you saw them, like I think I posted a picture on
it's so great.
Yeah, with the I may not write code, but I'm technical AF kind of thing. So so my passion is that if you want to be involved in open source, there is a place for you. And I think I will say that till I'm blue in the face, because it's like the whole reason I had those stickers printed was because this technical arrogance is kind of creeping back into open source. And it's that you have to write code in order to be relevant. And I'm like, dang it, we solved this 10 years ago. There's more to open source than just the code. That's an important part of it, a very important foundational cornerstone of it. But just like a house, the cornerstone does not the house make. It keeps it solid. It keeps, it's what you go off of. It's what you anchor to, but it's it's not your windows, it's not your electricity, it's not
Yeah,
your
there's
roof.
other parts to it for sure.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's the one way of kind of giving my history and what I'm passionate about.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing it. I love it when people kind of give like a kind of deep dive into their career path, because you never know who's going to relate to it. And I learned a lot. I didn't know you're managing a bar in New Orleans. I definitely want to go check that out. That sounds like so much fun.
It really was.
Okay, I just have like one question on that. Was it haunted? Because I feel like everything in New Orleans is haunted.
You know, where it was at, it's been there for over 50 years,
It's haunted.
and people say that it does have, and it was a speakeasy back in the day. So
Oh my gosh.
So
Interesting.
This
it
is
was like
wonderful.
the speakeasy thing. And so some people say it is. I never experienced it when I was there, and it's open 24 hours, 7 days a week, and there's live music every night. So, you know, no matter when I was never alone in the building. So, but there's other places all over New Orleans that are haunted. So
I'm like, side note, I'm obsessed with like haunted places, not necessarily because I believe in the ghosts, but because if you go to places that are said to be haunted, you get so much interesting kind of history about the town that you wouldn't necessarily get. So that's my pro travel tip. Okay, we're going to talk about what we're really here for, though. Not ghost hunting on the weekend, but open source. So we're talking about the landscape, the open source kind of landscape in AI today, some hot takes, some industry trends. So I want to go ahead and dive in here. I think first question I have for you too is thinking about the pros and cons of open source tooling in AI specifically. Like, why do we want it? Why are some people saying maybe they don't want it? What are kind of the general pros and cons and opinions we're hearing about open source in AI today?
I think the pros of open source tooling in AI is, your accessibility. These are tools that are usually freely available, and, they have a wide range of users, and it's inclusive, and it democratizes the access to these technologies. And so that accessibility is one. And then community collaboration is another. Like, the open source projects typically have large and very active communities, again, of developers, of researchers, of users, of all skill sets. And it's this collaborative environment that leads to, is the catalyst, I guess, for improvements and bug fixes and innovations and all those things that bring about enhancement to the tooling. Another key piece to the pros is the transparency.
Yeah.
You can see the code, understand how the algorithms that are working. They can, make sure for the security of it that there's no malicious or, hidden functionality that people won't be able to trust. And the community has many eyes, speaking of security, like many eyes on that project that can help identify vulnerabilities and fix vulnerabilities, right? So there's that piece of it. And there's the customization, that users have the ability to customize, modify, extend those tools for their needs and their requirements. So there's that flexibility around it too.
Yeah, Chase, what are you seeing? Yeah.
So I'm going to push back. Okay. So that Amber, that's great. And like, this is true. And I think that like, that's the healthy dream of open source. But a lot of people say just because it's open source doesn't mean it's good. Because yes, the reason like just because even when we talk about like, you don't contribute code, well, contributing an idea and knowing what code to write and what problem you're solving and having that feedback loop is equally important. So I think, in a perfect world, you have a community that's healthy enough to handle CVEs. And in a perfect world, you have a community that's healthy enough to consider a PR from maybe a competitor, right? Someone that's like kind of maybe, but I think that then we get all that, the community's healthy, but then when you're kind of external to the community and maybe you're someone who needs to actually run these systems and you're more on the operations side, they can be really tough. So, it's like, there's so many layers to open source, and it's like the famous no silver bullet essay, right? Like, there's a lot of potential just because it's open source, not essential complexity, right? Like complexity for complexity's sake, because it isn't necessarily bound to some of the engineering disciplines or some of the other things that you would have at more of like a kind of robust company, but still they can provide a lot of value because there's so many eyes on it at once. But just because it's open source and just because a lot of people are looking at it doesn't necessarily mean it's super valuable for your org, but it can be. I think that's what's really hard is it's like, look how many open source models are on Hugging Face. Look how many open source whatever is out there. And Amber will be the first person to tell you that not all open source is made equal, right? So how open source is it? And like, so it's like you start to want to adopt open source and you almost need to like get baptized by fire on what this actually means, especially if you're just a CTO that's like, we have an open source strategy. Well, that's like saying we have a cloud strategy. What's it going to do for you? What are you hoping to have here? Velocity, agility, stability. So I think that the world today is now trying to figure out how to do that, especially with now open core, right? Which is like, what is that? Is it open source?
Tell me, what is that?
Is it lock in? Right? So there's a lot.
I agree. And I think that's why I try to educate people and say, ask the questions. If you're buying a solution or you're trying to build your own, find out how healthy is the community. Is it maintained by 5 people or does it have enterprise level corporate backing? Which projects are, that co-opetition kind of thing? Are they working together for the good of, and I love talking with people about, when to collaborate, when should they be collaborating, when should they, stay diverse? Like when do you do that? But you're right. Not all open source projects are created equal, and asking just a few questions, like if you're building your own, looking at that maintenance schedule, how many contributors do they have? How many companies are contributing? Where are they contributing?
Yeah.
All of those type of things. And also looking at, okay, I'm going to buy this piece of software from a company, and are they involved in the community?
Yeah.
And not just giving code, but are they, or even if you don't see a direct line to a particular, a particular project that they might be incorporating, are they talking about it? Are they helping recruit people? Are they providing thought leadership? Are like all of those type of things matter too. But understanding that these communities are healthy and what is their role in keeping these communities healthy is very important. And I think too, back to that not created equal, and licensing is a big issue, understanding the licensing around, making sure you understand that, because we've seen, like, look at HashiCorp here lately, or look at Elastic in the past, or look at others who changed their, or MinIO, others who changed their licenses so that people can't incorporate them into an enterprise level solution without licensing them from that. And I think that all comes from, in open source, there's this transparency, and then the next layer that people don't often mention is trust. And that trust is that somebody has created this project, or somebody's have created this project, they've given it to the community, they expect the community to give back. And that is a social contract, if you will, between the people who are sharing their IP, their talent, their tool with the world, and saying, here, we're going to open source it for the good of everybody in the space. Understanding that when you do that, people give back. And when people don't give back, or they exploit it or take advantage of it, then companies then say, you know what, they've broken the trust. And so, you know what, now we don't have a choice. Now we have to, or we have a choice. And for the good of what we're trying to do, we're going to change our license. Good, bad, or indifferent. That trust, that social contract is so important. So you got to understand those pieces of open source a little bit. And like Chase said, it's not a hand wavy thing. Oh, open source. And when you just think about it as a marketing term, that never ends well.
It's a relationship. It's like,
it really
and like, I think if you look at open source, like an actual relationship, and this is like the difference between like a sales engineer that really knows what they're doing, or like a solutions engineer, and someone that's just trying to throw tools at you, right? Which is like, what are the boundaries of your organization? Let me help you understand the boundaries and the mission of this community. And hey, do they align? Right? Like, hey, does this community update their Right. Well, like the basics, right? Like, hey, how often does this patch? Are you up to keep up with that cadence? The vulnerabilities, how the risk profile of this community. Hey, this community might not do the 5-minute dev cycles for vulnerabilities. How often do you need patching? Hey, because I had someone talk to me today, and they're like, listen, sometimes you install these open source tools And it's like, well, there's 1,000 CVEs. And it's like, well, 15 minutes of research per CVE, who can pay for that? And hopefully it's the community, but who knows how fast this is coming in. So you as the org need to have this conversation. And it is a relationship. It is, hey, we're going to build value based off your software. Well, I'm hoping that you're going to be around tomorrow, and I'm hoping that you're going to be stable and secure, just like other things in life that we're going to be in a relationship with. And I think that's what's tough, because it's the Wild West at first, right? Until you start to kind of poke around and ask those questions.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I think, Amber, you mentioned community a few times. I'd love to kind of veer off the path and double click on that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you guys are thinking about building community around open source. That's a topic that's very interesting, and it really seems like the best open source projects are thriving when there's a good, engaged community around it.
So I've participated in lots of communities over my time in open source, and looking to even participate in more coming up. But I think when you look at HP as a whole, there's a whole list of projects that are there, two that come to mind that aren't even part of like what we're doing here on the AML side, Spiffy Inspire. And then when you look at the AI software solutions side of HP, you've got Pachyderm, you've got Determined AI. Those have, though, when HP acquired them, they came with their own communities and they're open source. And so we were recently able to, meet those teams and actually staff a booth with them and see how they're doing. So there's that piece of it too. And then there's the Esmeralda side that incorporates 12 plus different popular open source AI and ML tools into that solution. And one of the things I'm doing, let's just take Kubeflow, for example. Kubeflow is one of those solutions that's in there. Like, matter of fact, we'll kick off an election this week in that community. We're working to bring in new contributors. We stood up a security team and working to do that. It recently got added to the CNCF, and it's in the incubation stage. We're working on graduation. So, and that's the other thing. Find out if an open source project, if that project and community belong to a neutral foundation, for as neutral as they can be. Like, some would argue that the LF isn't as the Linux Foundation and its subsidiaries like the CNCF aren't neutral, but it's a good place to start, right? So you've got your Apache Foundation, your Linux Foundation, your CNCF, which is a subsidiary of that, the AI and data folks. You've got folks like on the hardware side, you've got Open Compute Project Foundation. On the embedded side, you've got Lenaro acting as that guardian in that space. And so when you look at that, the way you can't do everything. When you think there's 12 plus projects that are incorporated into one solution, it's systematic. It's okay, we're going to get involved in this, this community, and then we'll go to the next community, and then we'll go.
Right.
Like there's not enough often people that know how to get involved. Because now what we're seeing is there's this, back when I got involved, it was, the open source against the proprietary, and it was open source, win. And it was like this major stakes involved. And it was that David and Goliath kind of mentality, but now open source is everywhere. Open source is everywhere, whether it is
everywhere.
I think there's something about like it being such a new developing field. Like, is that why we're seeing so much of it? Is it like it just takes a community to kind of build a field that's so new?
I don't think, to be honest, well, if you take open source as a whole, it's not new. But if you break it down into the niche areas, and even when you start looking at how long the AI stuff has been around, think about chatbots. So it's been around for a while. It's just now coming to the forefront, kind of like, we've had storage for a long time, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's not called storage anymore. It's called cloud. It's called whatever.
Just rebranding mathematics over and over.
Whatever the buzzword of the day is. But the thing is, I think that in order to understand, that, again, like Chase said, it's a relationship. And when people get involved, right now we're seeing, what I was going to say was we're seeing a lot of folks are getting involved in open source because that's what their job depends on. They're not doing it because they're passionate about the principles and philosophies and how
We
you
should
apply
talk
them,
about this.
everywhere. They're getting involved because they start this job and it's a tool that is being used inside their organization, or they're a developer having to develop it. So now they got to learn about open source. And now they don't understand, like, what do you mean I've got to push this upstream? What do you mean I got to do this? What do you mean I got to participate publicly? And so there's this new shift of folks who are getting involved in open source because they're getting paid to do that. Then they learn more about it, and then they go, oh wow, this is a good thing, and this is kind of cool how this works. But they have to learn how to be good citizens in that space, both on an individual level and as that corporate entity. So both the individual and that organization have to learn how to be good citizens in the space. So like Chase said, there's many layers to it, but all of those layers make up the diversity and inclusion part of a community. And people learn something, they share something. Somebody says, oh, I don't know how to do a pull request. Well, how do you do that? So there's all these ways of getting involved. And Chase, you look like you're chomping at the bit to.
What percentage of people do you think?
I want to hear it. Yeah.
What percentage of people do you think are contributing open source just to put it on their resume right now, today?
That is one of those motivational paychecks.
Just to put it on their resume.
Yeah.
What did you do? Found a bug. Why? Right? And I saw a really
put it on my resume.
To put on my resume. And I saw a really great post about this. And AI is even more interesting when we start to talk about this, because AI now has we gave our applications a brain, and we've been studying years and years of philosophy and ethics to decide how our brains should act. But then how do we now teach these our technical children how to act, right? Like, so we learned that these hard skills, which gets you the job out of college, is potentially, how well can you code? How fast can you push? Like, we know the people like staying up doing the leak code. And then all of a sudden they start to say, they get to this higher level. Like, you get out of your hierarchy of needs, which is like, okay, I can get my job. I can I landed, and you're like, but why? What am I building? Why does the model do? And that's like a really hard question.
Yeah.
And by the way, you need a lot of people to discuss this, right? To like, culture, especially if we start to reach cultures, we start to reach, different organizations, right? Like, this relationship with your model and the decisions it makes has to agree with kind of your values. But then, so it's really interesting that like open source seems to be this cash cow of like, oh, I can learn Kubernetes because there's a lot of job openings on Glassdoor for Kubernetes, but it's so far from like, well, what does it do for you? Well, it doesn't matter. I can run it. Oh, well, I should learn ChatGPT. Well, what's your use case for LLMs? Have you thought about how much? Doesn't matter. It's like this buzz. And so I wonder how much that has impact on the quality of open source and the quality of conversations, because these soft skills of like, what are we building and where are we going, are so important compared to just the stability for stability's sake. Because like, you could have the most amazing, reliable, stable, highly available, incredible platform that does nothing. In fact, or doesn't work the way the people you're building it for expect it to work.
Almost just like
right?
a sandbox or like a playground, just like practice contributing.
Or without that empathy, like you build a platform and a data scientist looks at it and goes, this isn't how I do my work. You're like, correct. Let me tell you.
Customer feedback.
Let me tell you how to do your work. That's never going to work, ever. Let me tell you what to do.
Top-down approach. But that brings me to a point here. So I want to hear a little bit more about contributing to open source. Like, what do you recommend to people? Like, how should they find the right things to contribute to? And what does that kind of like process look like?
So the simple process is for an individual. Let's keep it simple and just work on the individual level, and we won't because to get a whole organization involved is a whole different kind of game. But, for an individual, if you have this, I say it all the time, if you have an itch you need to scratch, right? Like, you want to do something, or you're using a tool that, a lot of people are using ChatGPT now, or a lot of people, whatever, or an open source software, like whether it's Fedora or Rocky Linux or Ubuntu or,
we're going to circle back on ChatGPT. There's something interesting.
Regardless of what you're using, you say, I like this tool. How does it work? I want to be involved. I want to help influence it. So I always recommend find the community. We'll just use Kubeflow. Like, go to kubeflow.org, then sign up for the community, sign up for the distribution list, jump in the Slack channel and watch for a little bit. Read the documentation, figure out how the community works, figure out who's leading the community, what personalities are doing what. Maybe there's a working group or a special interest group inside of a community that kind of hones in on what you're really looking for. And you watch and you get to know people and you engage, and then you start going to some meetings, and then you figure out, oh, I have an opinion about this. Let me add my opinion. And you start slow. Like if you just go in and you're like, I'm here, and you raise, yeah, like, and you just kind of demand, people go, who are you? And I tell people this all the time. When you're new in a community, you can't just do a drive-by, oh, fix this sucks, go fix it. Well, one, you didn't tell me what sucks, you just blanket statement. Don't be vague about something. This button on this page didn't work when I tried to do this thing, whatever it happens to be. If you can provide logs, even better. But figure out how to do that. Make friends with people in the community who can mentor you and help guide you along. And then from there, once you get the lay of the land and understand how it works, then if you're not familiar with how to open an issue or how to, do a feature request, or even how to do a pull request, if you're somebody who, has the skills to fix something, just usually there's a guide, there's a style guide, there's a way to do that. So you got to look through the documentation, and then you can start getting involved little by little. Lead a group, take notes, help. Chase was talking about those soft skills. A lot of times people think soft skills are easy, and
They're not.
They're vulnerable. They're very vulnerable. The soft
the
skills.
coding skills
It's
are
not
the
as
hard
straightforward
thing.
how to learn them, I think, is why they're kind of intimidating almost. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's how you do it. Like you pick a project, you go sign up for their community stuff, you lurk a little while, you attend some meetings, and then once you start having opinions about things or suggestions, you jump in and offer it. It's kind of like
that looks good on a resume, like compared to like Chase, what you were saying, when people just come in, fix a bug, and then they're out. It's like, it looks okay on a resume. It doesn't stand out. But what you're describing, Amber, like that's going to make, I think, somebody's resume stand out, how they got involved in the community. They started to care about something. That's very interesting. Yeah.
And it's that thought leadership that really makes people lean in. Like I love to hear about the different technologies and how it works and how it all goes together and what the pieces are and how people make it work. I enjoy that piece of it, but the part I enjoy even more is empowering people to go find their own path.
What's in it? Right.
And empowering people that find their voice and not be afraid to use their voice. Like, that is so important, because everybody has a talent and a skill that somebody else can benefit from. And if you ever think, oh, this person doesn't write code, so why do I need to listen to them? All right, you go try to market your stuff. You go try to get the blog post out, or you go try to convince people. You try to have, you try to go and persuade people that your ladder is now the best whoop-de-doo ladder out there, and that's why people should use it, or whatever, right? And so it's all those other skills that are needed to go along with that. They're that relationship between the two, if it's broken, it doesn't work very well. You need all those pieces to be successful. So
and from a wise product person, as an SE, right, I get to talk to product, and the greatest comment from a product person was, he just calmly looked at me and he's like, Chase, you can be right and still lose. Right. So it's like sometimes right with like these, this is the technical, this is you're like pushing, you're like, you guys are wrong, you're trying to push this PR, but like the way you measure right is so different, right, for depending on who you are. So if I were to talk about how to get involved and how to start, like, being curious around a community, first off, I think, Amber, the best book I've you've made so many good book recommendations, but Art of Community is a phenomenal one, because it starts to talk about, hey, what does it look like to be in a healthy community? Okay, well, here's the first thing. And this is like one of the questions, like when you're poking around an open source community, how to find this. Okay, find the talking head, find the advocates within the community. Okay, so for me, Kubeflow, Terry, right? Terry's the best. And Terry's like, he's at Acuity. He's like, is he Kubeflow pipelines? He's everywhere, right? And so I found Terry, And I'm like, hey, Terry, I got some questions. Hey, how does this work? Blah, blah, blah. And Terry's like, what up, dude? Like, let me tell you. And he just answers the questions, and he's an approachable person, because you learn in art community that the goal of a community leader is to respect the boundaries of the community, because we need boundaries so people can be safe and happy. And we don't want people just pushing whatever. We don't want people to be like, we're going to run, here's my new database. Like, that's not what we do. It's like, we can't have, everyone come in. We want people in, but so they'll respect the boundaries, but then they'll also say, hey, we want you to have a path to the inner circle. We want you to be to someone that could lead a manifest group or something in the future. But here's kind of the path where you start to build the trust. You start to go into the circles, and like, here's what it takes to get there. Mm-hmm. Having someone like that in the community where you can just say, hey, man, I don't want to mess with your project, right? Because this is your baby, right? Like, you've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this project, but I want to help.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing. How helpful is that? And if they're like, well, it's not that helpful, then be like, okay, time out. Okay, great. How can I be helpful in this community? Let me get started, and like have that conversation, and then start small and then poke your head around. But finding that advocate and understanding, reading maybe art of community to understand what it takes to see a healthy community and say, hey, in theory, there should be a path for me to get to kind of the higher levels within. I think that's your first step. And so just like Amber said with Slack, get on Slack, ask some questions, see a guy that's answering a question, maybe DM him and be like, hey, this is why I'm here. Hey, I'm really interested in this because of XYZ. Am I crazy? And, have that start the relationships, because that's what it's about. Because in the end, right, we all need that. Dude, like, yeah. I worked in the infrastructure, right, in the big infrastructure lab. If I didn't have a dude I could like text about a firewall, like I was done. I'm like doing some storage stuff, and I'm like, because otherwise, what am I going to do? Go read the Cisco firewall certifications so that I can make a change, or am I going to go make a change and destroy my lab? Like, you got to have people in your network, and that's the beauty of it.
I like that a lot. You mentioned a book. I'll definitely try to link, if you send the link over to me, Chase, I'll link that, The Art of Community, so our readers can see that as well.
Art of Community and the Nonviolent Communication, the two best books ever.
Send it over. I feel like every podcast I get book recommendations. It's fantastic. Keep it going.
That's great. Books are the best.
It is. Okay, here's a controversial question for you guys, though. We talk about like copyright, plagiarism, that kind of stuff. In the world of like Medium articles and books and that kind of thing, and movies and TV, that's a whole debate. Let's talk about it in the context of open source. How do you feel about contributing code to an open source data or open source project that has been written by ChatGPT? How are people handling this today?
I don't think.
Well, are you saying how do you feel about someone contributing code that's written by ChatGPT? Or are you saying how do you feel about ChatGPT absorbing open source projects code without them consenting to it and then generating
the first one? Like, let's say you're open, although that's very interesting. That's a whole podcast.
Right. Like your code could be consumed by a model that's now going to write your code for other people.
If it's on the internet. Yeah. Both are interesting. What do you guys think?
Well, I think you were just at KubeCon, so let's talk about the initial like contributing code where you might have generated it from ChatGPT, Amber. Because I think, did they talk about that at KubeCon? I know the Linux Foundation said some stuff.
Well, my thing is that this was with anything. Like, I don't care if it's code. I don't care if it's a quote in a thought that's in a paper, a line in a song, whatever it happens to be. I think attribution is so important in open source. And if you're not giving the original creator attribution, then you're exploiting them and you're using them, and you're not acknowledging that you're standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, that's the big thing in open source. We stand on the shoulders of giants because everyone that's come before. And again, it's that social contract of trust. And if you can't give attribution, then to me, it's almost like stealing. It's plagiarism.
It does feel that way.
And I feel like and I don't know, because I haven't tried to write anything. I thought about, there's a script that I need written, and I thought about, let me just pop this in here and see what it comes back with. But I want attribution. I want to know where that was pulled from. If it's using someone else's code, then I want to be able to give them attribution to my script. If I I don't use somebody else's anything unless I can give them attribution. It's like writing a blog post, using somebody else's exact words or thoughts around something without quoting it or even acknowledging it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And we have to be able to acknowledge where that code came from. And
Right.
I think to do anything less is just wrong.
I'm just
And
gonna keep
maybe I'm standing alone on this.
I'm just gonna keep
No.
busting your chops here
Oh,
because
Chase, let's hear it.
okay.
Yeah.
What's the mental phenomenon where you're at a table and if someone behind you is talking about saxophones, you're gonna start talking about saxophones at your table and you don't know why. And when you start to think of all the ideas you have in your head and all the things that you wrote from that script, you could be accidentally copying Shakespeare. You could be accidentally copying a book you read, a conversation you had that you didn't attribute
Your
to it.
brain doesn't always know the sources.
Right, right. And so what's interesting is ChatGPT isn't necessarily directly plagiarizing, right? When we look at how a model's training, it's just finding a bunch of patterns from out there. Just like when you're walking around New York and street and like a kid, right? You're hearing all these different ways of conversation, you're picking up slang, you're
Inspiration.
picking
It's
up
artistic inspiration.
true, but I mean, and you start the difference between you and GPT is you're making a mental model, GPT is just transcribing, right? Like it's literally just transcribing. So like there's this concept that it scraped the internet and
Yeah.
it can't tell you, hey, here's all the things I talked to get my ideas from, but it finds these patterns from all this code and then it wrote code for you. And it's like, well, where did you, because it's not necessarily, it's not like it's going and saying control C, control V from Kubeflow. If you're like, build me an operator for a storage class, it's not gonna be like, boop, boop. It's not just copying from the internet. It's like, it's like taking the general concept or taking the patterns it's seen 1,000 times and writing that out for you. And then another question is are you good enough to validate, like if this code you wrote, right, you don't know where it came from, you didn't write it, are you good enough at reading the code to understand the what and how
It
and say I
matters.
should push this?
The worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is when you're writing code, whether it's open source or not, is to just be like, hey, ChatGPT, like make a random array of this and that, and then like just copy paste that code and go. Like you need to understand if what it gave you was even right, and then you need to be able to like tune it.
Well, what's the runtime considerations, right? Is this the way I should really do this? Like,
yeah,
is this dumping everything? Like, are this dumping everything to memory? Are we not using pointers at all? This is a nightmare. And so it's like, you still have to be savvy enough to validate it. Is it like the difference between kind of like autocomplete looking over your shoulder, like pair coding, like we see with like autopilot versus like a GPT? Now, the question is if that's pushed upstream to a community. I mean, regardless of what code you write, they're going to review it, right? In theory.
Yeah. That it's still interesting because like I kind of like agree with both of you, and I can draw a parallel with like art. Like I was messing with Midjourney and I was creating images of just like fictional characters, and I was showing it to my brother who like doesn't have much of a background in AI, and he said, who owns those? Like who should get royalties for those images you just created? Or like, is it Midjourney? And I showed him the prompts that I wrote, and I wrote the prompt describing the character and everything. And then I said, make the character wear an outfit in the style of Alexander McQueen, who's a fashion designer. And then he was like, oh, that's it right there. Like, that's where the royalties go. Like, everything else is just kind of average, generalized. But then you went specifically and based it off of what an artist has very much like invested their career in creating. And that's where it's like, okay, that artist needs
that style
from it. Yeah. But
that's so hard.
That piece, it would just be kind of like general average.
Right. But this is like the constant battle, even with like Disney and stuff, is like, where do you draw the line? Can I say, well, I've got this new blue, it's my blue, you can't use it? Or like, hey, this is the way I talk, I'm only allowed to talk this way. Like, this is my cadence. What do you do with that? So I think it's really interesting, right? The style of XYZ. Well, where did he get his style from? How do you attribute that? And but how do we also have the boundaries to protect artists? But is it the fact that, when I look at art and when I look at something someone wrote, right? I think really you're looking at the emotional energy and the technique and the message that they put behind it, right?
Yeah,
so
you're just piggybacking off of that. So in like the context of open source, it's like if you like take someone else's code, like if I just took like Chase's GitHub repo and I said, hey, write code that does this in the style of this guy, I think that I would have to credit you. But if I just ask ChatGPT, like ChatGPT generally, like write some code that does this general thing, it feels a little bit more.
But the idea itself is a technology, and it is something interesting, right? And this is like philosophers argue this, right? Like an idea is a technology, but like, so okay, Chase, make me a painting based, Picasso style, and I make it an AI, and you look at it, you're like, well, yeah, but part of what was special about the Picasso was that it was Picasso making that painting with a lived experience, right? It's kind of like if your brother walks in and he does this perfect portrait of you, and he's like, check this out, I hand drew it, and you're like, that's incredible. The light's a little off though. You take a picture and show it to them. You're like, checkmate. Like, I think it's different, right? So I think it's
That's
almost
a good analogy. Okay.
So I think the art form is so much more than just the end product, right? And I think that's the conversation we need to have, or we need to understand, do we value that? Do we just value end products or the journey that it takes to produce it, right?
Yeah. It's a good debate. Yeah, Amber, what are you thinking?
I was going to tell Chase, like in some tools out there that use ChatGPT to build marketing campaigns or write blog or whatever, they'll give you the sources. They'll and so if we could get to the point where you could say, create this, write this thing that does this, but give me the sources that you used to write, if it pulled sources.
Love it.
Instead of just like you said, identifying patterns or whatever. If we could apply the same thing that some tools, on the AI side that aren't writing code, that are doing other things, that will say, cite the sources, and they cite sources.
Where did you get this?
Where did you
What books did you read? Who'd you talk to?
Exactly. Or what repositories did you review? Because even if it's not the exact code, but it's something similar, where you can say that, hey, this particular tool or this script or this whatever was written by ChatGPT, and it sourced the following repositories to come up with this. That would be great.
But Amber, it sounds like you're saying that the future of AI is the explainability, right? Because I can interrogate a person. Look at all the CISOs that during all the Ukraine stuff, all the crazy security, people were panicking, and they're just like, CISOs were in the firing line, right? Because they're being interrogated. Well, you can at least interrogate a CISO. Okay, now what if I start to trust these models, and these models are doing everything? Right now, there's no brain. It's literally like if you're going to try to do brain surgery on a CISO instead of interrogating them, because the model can't explain itself really. It makes a decision. It can say, well, here, blah, blah, blah. But all the weights and the parameters of that network that created it is really complex. And so it is literally like being like, we should figure out why this person did the thing they did. Like, we should figure out why they're a killer. We're going to go look at their brain and start to ask questions. You're going to see the structure of it, but you're not going to be able to understand what network neurons fired and all the things that caused the model or the person to do the thing. So this is like a really hard problem. This explainability in AI is do you have the data? Do you have the data hygiene? Do you have to really have all the lineage that said then the model, because of all these things, the childhood, their lives, they did X, and we can prove it? Because the EU and a lot of governments are starting to say that you need to, because these models could impact people's lives, right? And you need or impact some protected class. And you need to explain why. And that's a philosophical question of how it took the data and interpreted it to make an action. That is not a model. That's a person saying, do this with that. And that's hard.
Well, look at what we're already seeing when people realize, you know what? I can take somebody's voice and I can create, this song in their style. And unless people are really listening, do they really know if it's really is it live or is it Memorex? Like, what is it? Like, who is really the voice behind this? Because some models are so good that unless you're like an audio file or, that really can pick out nuances, in the way somebody speaks or what the music that you hear, you may not, at just a quick listen, you may not be able to tell the difference. So look what we're seeing there. And people go, that's not my music, that's not mine. That was created. And so we could see, or writers whose works are being done or being used, or their style is being copied, and now it's no longer uniquely their style, which is what made it awesome in the first place, because it was different.
True.
And it was theirs, and it was it was their uniqueness. And so
And
what happens if everybody has the same fingerprint?
right. Well,
It would get
and
so
even
boring if everyone has the same fingerprint. We lose
if
that
we just,
uniqueness that makes like written word, art, code
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
let's continue. I mean, continuing down the open source path, right? We're looking, is it valuable? Well, let's talk about, I feel like having these conversations about models and should you trust models, should you just chat GPT, is
Yeah.
like you can compare this to the basics of like, should you trust Wikipedia? Remember in middle school, or like in like high school, where they're
Oh my
like,
gosh. Yes.
you just copied something from Wikipedia. And there's
You
this
could put
human
anything in there. You weren't allowed to like cite it as a source because like you could just update it so it backed you up.
true. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
unless there's oversight, right?
Uh-huh.
Who's what, like, if you read Sapiens, he talks about this, Yoval, who's like, "Well, if there's no one to oversee it, it's just entropy takes over." So it's like, do you trust this model? Well, same with Wikipedia. A lot of people are looking at Wikipedia, and as humans, we say, well, a lot of people are looking at it. That means it's really valuable.
Mhm.
Well, who's fact checking it, right? Like they have to at least cite their sources, but how many people actually follow those sources? And it's like getting deeper and deeper, right? Because now this model read a Wikipedia article that read these other articles that some guy did, but like are each one of those articles actually accurate and true? Who wrote those, right?
Yeah,
So it
the
just
definition
becomes
of
this rabbit
knowledge
hole.
and true is starting to get like layers to it. It's a
I
confusing
mean,
world.
this is the things they carried, right? Like the truth is
Yeah.
finicky.
Yeah.
So like it's hard. It's hard. And ultimately, it's kind of like, how is it working for you? Is the only thing you can really ask people is, how is it working for you? How is that open source model working for your org? You know?
Your specific scoped business problem. I think it's a good way to look at it.
Right. It
We have,
has
like,
to be.
yeah, it does. We have like just a minute left at almost at time here. And I want to be respectful of your all's evening, but maybe Amber, kick it to you to kind of wrap up like your thoughts in terms of that.
I think, well, I was hoping we would get to the song title.
Oh,
The song thing, because
that will be the
Oh,
last question. I
what
forgot
song?
about that one.
but I think there's a lot of change coming. There's a
Yeah.
lot of complexity that we need to deal with. And we need to make sure that the people, whether we can influence that or be part of these decision-making conversations or encourage other people who might know more than, I always assume I'm the dumbest person in the room, but like that there's always somebody that has more insight and knowledge about these particular things are influencing these decisions and these licenses that are going to come. Like models aren't really licensed right now. The data is not really licensed. I think I read somewhere that art created by, Chat GPT is not copyrightable. Things like that. Like, what does this really mean going forward? What's the ethical dilemma that we have to look at? It's still like the kind of the Wild West right now.
Yeah.
And just like the days in the Wild West, there's a new sheriff in town every other week because
Right.
somebody takes exception to the way they're doing things.
Or right, someone gets shot, and you're like, new sheriff, here we go. Like,
Exactly.
gosh.
So I think that
True.
those of us who care about this
Yeah.
and care about all this in open source and what the future of this is going to look like, we need to find our voices. We need to pay attention to the discussions, and we need to weigh in where it makes sense and where we can. I mean, I'm not going to, lose sleep over it, and let it ruin my day. But it is very important that we look at how things are done and how they're being attributed and, how we're using the information that we now have access to at our fingertip and within seconds. And are we being good citizens in this space?
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's definitely a good kind of sentiment to end on here. But I do have one last question. That's a super fun one. If you were to use a single song title to describe modern data science, what would it be and why?
Chase, I'll let you go first on that one.
So if we're talking about like a song that I relate with,
Yeah.
I think I was, so there's like two potential MCRs, My Chemical Romance songs. It's either Teenagers or I'm Not Okay. And I think it's because like
Oh my gosh.
AI goes so quick, right? And like it's hard not to be jaded because there's so many different, just like when you're a teenager, there's so much transformation happening and it's happening so quick. It's hard not to be like, what is this? And I think that you either are like, screw this, or like, I don't, whatever, you guys are just, this is all buzz and dumb and LLMs have no application. Or you're like, I'm overwhelmed, right? Like, especially
Yeah.
if you're like, I can relate as someone who goes from like a systems guy to Kubeflow, and now I'm like, crash coursing transformers and LLMs and looking at like post grad stuff. Like, it's a lot. So those songs kind of personify that feeling of coming of age and just being like, it's a lot. But I think tying it into your previous question of like, how do you move forward? It is going to becoming an adult, which is like, well, what's in it for them
Mhm.
and what's in it for me? And that's what you need to pay attention to, because there will always be shiny pennies, right? So really being focused on like, what's the value for me besides a line on my resume that'll get me a job, that, because you got to think for longevity versus that quick bang. And I think
Mhm.
that's how you keep an eye on the pulse, how you see things mature and start to say, okay, let's lean that way. So
It's a great parallel, and now I know what's coming out of the headphones when you're starting your day. It's My Chemical
oh
Romance. I can relate.
oh
I've got playlists.
oh for
Amber,
sure.
tell me about yours.
I think Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are Changing" kind of sounds
Uh-huh.
to me, because it really, to me, it really kind of includes, this dynamic and transformative notion that we're seeing, across data scientists, and that need for data science, and the need for data scientists to, and ML engineers and others, to really navigate these changes with,
Yeah.
the idea that they have to be agile and they got to be adaptability. Because when you look at the song and then you think about 1964 when it was written and all the things that were happening, especially in the US, you think about,
Hmm.
in data science right now, we're seeing the rapid change, we're seeing the adaptation, we're seeing the impact that it has on society, and we're also seeing that uncertainty and the transformation around it, much like we saw when Bob Dylan wrote the song. So that's what I would use to sort of say, that's the one song that I think I would use to describe modern data science.
I
Much
love
more
that.
hopeful.
We're
Much more
making a
hopeful.
playlist. Okay, I got one for you guys. We're ending on this. It's not hopeful, it's opportunistic. So my song is Run This Town by Beyonce and Jay-Z, because like
Okay.
in an open field like this, like you can just come in and start building empires. You just have to identify the gaps, surround yourself with the right people, and like we can build stuff on this. It's actually like helping the world and contributing, but there's also just so many opportunities here for like innovators and people with that drive. So that's my playlist there.
It's very exciting. Like
Yes, right?
with great uncertainty and chaos is great opportunity, right?
Yeah,
So I think
chaos
I
is
think leaning
opportunity.
in. I think like, if like the end of the day, lean in, fight your amygdala, who's like, what are we doing? Just be like, we're doing this, and we're
We're
gonna figure
rolling
it
with
out.
it.
We're
We're
rolling with it.
we're rolling with it. We're just gonna, just do what we got to do, and be an agent for good in this space.
Mhm.
I say that maybe people often accuse me of looking at things through rainbow lenses and,
Those
rose
lenses. We need
glasses.
people to see things through those lenses more, I think.
And
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm very optimistic, and
Hmm.
I think we'll solve it and we'll figure it out, as long as we're willing to iterate and not say, here's the definition today, and not be willing to, you know, add to that definition later, or add to those models, or add to those licenses.
Right.
Again, being an agent for good. So
Yeah. There's so much
Our
value to rose-colored glasses as long as you know how and when to take them off and put them back on. I think it's kind of a superpower. That's kind of good to hear.
I
Yeah.
hope I have a superpower.
That is a superpower. A lot of
awesome.
people have that. All right. Well, thank you both. This was really fantastic. Really appreciate you guys being on the show and sharing your perspective here. Hope you guys have a good evening.
Thanks
You
for having
too. Rock on.
Bye, guys.